Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Building Brand Gravity. I'm Steve Halsey. In this episode, we'll be talking with Kim Losey, CEO of Rapid Robotics, on the topic of AI-driven manufacturing as more and more automation and robotics seem to be taking over the world. We're going to explore how her innovative leadership approach was inspired in part by the design thinking she learned at Hasbro, and how she's applied that and a really customer-centric focus to move from creating and marketing toy robots to developing real ones that are fundamentally changing the face of automation. Kim is a serial entrepreneur and a business designer. She has a passion for manufacturing, marketing, and really leading high-growth businesses. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because she really seems to have a knack for joining companies at inflection points in their journey and really helping kind of speed their transformation. So let me just give you a little bit more about her background. She's led global teams and being responsible for growth of some of the most well-known toy and entertainment brands. She's built award-winning omni-channel retail businesses. She was part of the founding team of Modio, which Audiodesk acquired in 2014. And from there, she became responsible for their emerging products, acquisitions, and growth, including Fusion 360. If that wasn't enough, she moved on, joined Rapid Robotics, where she served as the Chief Growth Officer and Chief Marketing Officer before being recently named as their new CEO. And she is one of the few female executives in both the robotics and technology space. So some rare air indeed. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So now that I embarrassed you with like the official bio, maybe you can give our listeners a little bit of background about who Kim is and how you got here.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's really been, as I sit back and there are days, honestly, that I think like, how did I even get here? I don't know. It's an honor to be in this position. And I think, even as a little kid, I was always sort of dreaming up new ways of being able to do things. And I think that's where like the business designer came from. I did go to school originally for design. And then I realized, recognized, I guess my parents aren't famous. I don't have a giant trust fund that was going to support this dream business that I wanted to make. So I better go do something else. So I really got into marketing and entrepreneurship, but still with that strong design angle. And so, I tend to really think about everything in terms of why is it this way? Is it optimal this way? How could it be better? What really matters to people? And then that usually leads leads myself and my teams to big ideas that kind of make businesses grow. So that's been sort of the continuous path, I guess. I've taken a lot of different steps to kind of get there, but that's been the similarity across my career.
So you've been doing design thinking before design thinking was a buzzword, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose.
So let me set the stage a little bit for our conversation for our listeners here in terms of just really understanding the need for AI-driven robotics, automation, and all those other things. A broad range of companies from manufacturings to third-party logistic providers, food and beverage processors, companies in consumer packaged good, technology and electronics. I'm not done yet. Retail and e-commerce, fulfillment center, pharmaceutical and med device manufacturers, automotive industry, agriculture operations, and even the assembly of things that are fundamental for renewable energy. They all seem to have one thing in common, and that's that they all need really adaptable, scalable, and efficient models for operations to stay competitive and meet market demands that seem to be evolving at a better and faster pace. Yet almost all of them face some pretty common challenges: workforce, capital investment, supply chain chaos, just the speed of the change of consumer preferences, and the list of that all goes on. So this kind of inflection point not just of
Yeah, I
Rapid
think so. I
Robotics,
mean,
but of the
for me, it was
industry,
something that really stretched me out of my
really is
comfort zone.
where I think the
I am
promise of
naturally more of
AI,
an introvert.
robotics, and
And so
automation
sitting
come
on the
in.
phone
So
all
from
day
where
long
you
calling
sit,
people I don't
how have all
know
these different
is
factors
really not super
really
comfortable
kind
for
of
me.
driven
But
how you guys think at
it
Rapid
built up
Robotics and
this.
where you're going?
Yeah. I think, I always, when I'm trying to solve problems like this, always put myself in the shoes of the customer. It's tricky sometimes working for a technology company where you're surrounded by amazing ideas that honestly are very easy to get excited about, but it really comes back to what's going to change the life or the trajectory of a company and the executives and the people at that company. And so I put myself in their shoes and I just think, I have less time. I really want to do the right thing for our sustainability initiatives and for the earth and for my people and for bringing products to market that the company has this vision for, and I can't do it
right
because
away.
I don't
First of
have
all, and we'll get to this
enough
soon in terms of the
human
team
labor
that
to be
you
able
work
to
with
do
today
it.
at Dow.
The work
It
that I
really
do have
puts
for
you in
those
a
humans
place
really
of
isn't
symbiotic,
very rewarding work for
compassion
humans.
with media relations
I
professionals
think
who
that
are calling
I'm just
in a different
like
way.
there's
We don't like to
less
think about it as
time,
sales,
less
but it's
money,
got
more
similar.
constraints on
The other
everything,
thing
and it
is,
really
and we'll
adds to
definitely
this
talk about this later,
complexity that
because
just
when you and
becomes
I were
very hard
chatting
to
and you were making
manage. And
points
so I
about
think,
what it means to be a truly
I think as
matrixed
a service
organization.
provider, as a
I would
robotics company,
assume
how
that
can
background,
I
it
think I
really
can
gives
help.
you
I can
some
help solve
compassion
that
and connection
problem.
with your colleagues in
And that's
sales
where
and
I
other
think
types of
AI
parts of
is
the
very
business.
exciting because we're just really at the forefront of what's possible. And in a very non-technical way of thinking about I think I go back to my toy roots in toys and think it's like, it's like a superpower or a power up, right? All of a sudden I can do 10 times more than was ever possible before. I can handle much more complexity. I can solve problems faster. I can solve them in ways that I never would have even thought of, as with the usual human
It's true. And
constraints
it's
that I
interesting
have.
because as you're making that pivot,
And that to me is,
from public
is super
policy to
exciting. So I
business
think,
and
how do we
marketing
harness that
communications,
to be able to solve
that
these
sense of who
really
is the stakeholder and
big
who's the
problems that
customer
customers are
is
facing
really,
in
really
terms of being
important.
able
But
to
even
find
before we get there, one of
ways
the
to
things you
use
said that's very interesting
automation
about the work you
to
did at the
do
Wildlife
those, the
Conservation
dull, dirty,
Society and then the
dangerous
work you do
kind of
today at
tasks.
Dow.
And I think
And by the way, I now
reason
have the
that
Simon and Garfunkel.
automation
It's all
has been
happening
so
at the
hard
zoo
for so
in my
many
head, so
companies
that's
to
fine.
handle is
Now that you
because
said the
there is
Bronx
so
Zoo,
much
that's
variability
growing up in the 70s, that
in
commercial here was
SKUs.
on
And
all
I
the
think the
time. So
automation
that's in my head now.
industry
Just
has
a little
been
side thing.
plagued by
But you talked about being in an energy intensive manufacturing
delays
business, and that's very interesting. You really have that through line of
just sort of
sustainability.
a lot of stops and
Sometimes when
starts
people are
and a
thinking
lot
about
of
energy, they're thinking about energy
traditional
producers.
thinking
They're
about
not
how
always
things
thinking about
happen,
energy
and a lot of
users.
there
And that
hasn't
must
been
be
a lot
that
of
must have been a really
transparency around
helpful
pricing.
lens for you.
And I just think all that
to
needs to stop.
adopt or
There's
learn
such a
more
huge
about as you came
opportunity
into the
ahead
Dow
for all of us to
context
be able to
from the
win and to help
nonprofit context.
customers
Is that
win.
true?
We need to think differently about it. And I think that, AI can really help us get there.
Well, and that's what I think so powerful
How
about
complex
what companies like
energy
yours are
really
doing is,
when we're talking about, but energy
really
is what
embracing
drives
that idea that you just
everything,
hit of the
right? I mean, even
variability
if you
of
bring it forward
SKUs.
to
And in a lot of
today
ways,
and think about,
think in
AI
an
at all data
industry
centers that
agnostic
we
way,
built,
right?
one of the
I
biggest
just like covered
issues
everything
that
from
they're
ag
going to be
operations to
contending with over time
manufacturing to
is access
logistics to
to
putting
electricity or
together,
energy to power
turbines for
those
wind
data centers. So
power.
it's a
But that
hugely important
ability
topic.
to
And you come into a company
think in
like
an
Dow, and
agnostic way and
half
embrace
the
that
company here,
variability really
experts on
seems
energy in
very
some way, or
powerful. So
energy or
when
engineers.
you sit there
So it was a
at
huge
Rapid
learning
and when
curve
you're
for me
talking to
at
new
first. It's
employees that
been
you
great
bring on,
experience because it ultimately
what do
is
you
what
tell them about what
drives
is their
everything.
mission?
So,
What are they
as we're
actually
looking to
solving for the world?
decarbonize.
Well, I mean, we are an American-based company right now. I mean, and we do have bigger plans beyond that. But to start with, like, I am very passionate about seeing manufacturers win.
It's so
all
funny.
the things
As
that
I
become
kind of live in
possible
a
with
double
that. And so
consciousness of
I think
a
that's it. I
communications
think it's
practitioner
helping
and counselor, but
in some
also an
ways at a very
organizational
big,
leader.
high level. Like we're
In
helping.
my role, and I'm always
We can
thinking
help to
about
make a better world.
what are those
And we
messages
can
and
make
mindsets that are most
better
important for
products.
this
We can
moment.
make
And you
products
reminded
more
me, it's like, first of all,
sustainably.
pay
We
attention to the
can
nuance.
help
And also, there's a lot of dynamic tensions out
companies
there.
be able
I
to
was
harness
totally
the
thinking
human
also
talent
about
that
AI.
they do have to do
How
really
we're in this
meaningful,
moment where AI is going to advance so many
thoughtful
things.
work,
People have a
rather
lot of
than
feelings, hashtag feelings
standing
about
at a
AI.
machine, moving a
But
thing
the
from
fact
one place
is
to the
that
other, and
there's
people
such
getting
amazing
hurt
things
in
happening, but it's
terrible
also this
conditions.
really
often very hot.
challenge
yeah.
regarding
And so I think that
energy
we're
consumption.
making
And
things better. And I
that
think
just
we're
seems to be the name of the game today. How is
allowing
it that
things to be made
as
more
professionals
cost
in this
effectively,
space, we
which
really
hopefully
pay
will bring
attention to deep
manufacturing back
nuance,
to this
which I think is
country
very
in many
important
ways.
working with companies like Dow, but also
And for people
understand
to
that
be
some
able to
things are in dynamic
companies then, if
tension
they're
with each
saving
other.
money
Do you
in
see
that way,
that
I
as
think
a
can use it
mindset or a skill
toward
set that should be cultivated
more
these days?
innovation that actually makes better products?
And I think there's a lot of power in what you're saying, because what's interesting to me is
that
it's not all about technology. It's not about technology for the technology's sake. It's ultimately, what is it that we're trying to solve and improve? And in a lot of ways, how can we make the world a better place?
That's not.
And I want to kind of cover a topic here. We're marketers, so
negative ramifications.
We can't have a marketing discussion without coming up with new terms, right? That would just be
that's right.
fun.
We should give it an acronym too.
Exactly. So we'll come up with an acronym here. But when you and I were chatting a little while ago, we got into this riff where we were talking about green fields and brown fields. And I know everybody knows this, but just to kind of center us for our listeners, green fields are things that are completely bespoke and built from scratch, right? It's really starting from a virgin site and idea and building things up. Brown fields are where you're taking existing facilities or operations that have become outdated, and you need to update and retrofit to basically breathe new life into them. And then when you and I were talking, we really got to this notion of it doesn't have to be greenfield or brownfield. What if we could create something that we called the smart field? So we'll have to make an acronym before we're done, but for the term smart field, to give some context for our listeners, it's essentially the idea that you could create a next generation of warehousing or manufacturing facilities where you kind of reimagine every aspect of operations to find the optimal efficiency for a particular workflow, right? So that's central to the idea of being smart, is that you're not static. You can be ever changing as customer preferences or consumer choice changes, as market dynamics changes, because in that case, and what we're seeing with just the pace that you need to adjust, optimal basically changes from day to day, year to year. So you can't retrofit the facility every time that you do that. You basically need something that can help you evolve with speed and with agility and can deploy things in a different way. And from my very simplistic layman's viewpoint, that's why stationary robots don't work for the long term. You got these high setup costs. It's not real easy to move them from one task to the other, let alone from one part of facility to the other. You got to retrain them. You got to work on the new task. That means downtime, competitive disadvantage. But what you guys are doing is really using adaptive AI,
it was a great experience,
and particularly computer vision,
back to the career
to really kind of turn all that on its end. And
not something
that's what I mean about kind of creating these smart fields that you can adapt on the fly and you can move.
Right.
Can you tell me just a little bit about that? I mean, tell me about smart fields. How do we bring them to life? And then in particular, how can that be a point of competitive advantage for companies like Rapid?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, going back to, I don't know, for the past 10 years, I guess, 10 years ago, I started working for Autodesk on the design and manufacturing organization, and although I learned a lot about manufacturing in the toy industry, really spent a lot of time with manufacturers through my work at Autodesk. And I started to understand, the whole concept of digital transformation and the state that all of these different companies were at, their complete range. And even today, you see very large companies that, world renowned companies that are still in the, early phases of a digital transformation. And so you go into their facility and they want robotics. They need robotics because they don't have, their worker safety is a high priority for many of them. And so they say, look, these are the types of tasks where we're getting the most injuries. We really would love to automate this thing. And you see, well, there's all of this infrastructure, automation, old equipment, or other infrastructure that's in there. And a lot of times robotics and automation takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of mechanical components. It's not very agile, and it just doesn't work, or it costs so much money that then the ROI is years later. And by then you're really needing to retrofit the facility again. And as we were talking, that week over breakfast, the greenfield concept, we heard a lot about it over the past few years when money was, quote unquote free. Right now, money is very expensive, much more expensive anyway. And we're seeing more and more companies that are looking to retrofit and modernize, the brownfield kind of facility. And that's where I think traditional solutions just don't work. We need something that is agile. We need something that is with a more minimal footprint. And that's where companies like Rapid, I think, can really come in. I think if we think about automation in a different way and think, why does it have to be so big? Why does it have to be so permanent? Why does it have to be so expensive and have so many components? And there are good reasons that historically it has, but with the increase in AI, generative AI, and 3D vision, that doesn't have to be the case. I kind of think about robotics like in terms of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom, it really comes down to the fundamental layer is really about perception. That robot needs to be able to understand what is it seeing, where is it, and what is it seeing. And so we built Rapid ID to be able to do that. So all of a sudden we're giving this human-like instinct to robots because they're able to perceive what's in front of them, which means that you can create systems. Then you apply sort of an application layer to the perception layer. And then you apply the physical manifestation of that, the hardware component, and it can be optimized as a result of those bottom two layers. And it gives you, means that all of a sudden you can deploy robots that have a camera, a robot, and much more minimal footprint than you've ever had before, which makes it fit more easily into some of these, into like a smart field kind of situation. It means that it costs less. It means that it has fewer components to break. And most importantly, I think it has the ability to handle the variability of modern business. You don't have to spend hours and days training waypoints for a robot to know how to go to a thing. It can see the thing. And then all of the AI and training models that go into it tell it exactly, it knows. Here's where I have to go. Here's where that thing is. Here's how I grasp it. Here's what I grasp it with. Here's the model. It can run an analysis almost instantly on which model should I be using to pick that thing, because I kind of know what it is, or I know the classification of that thing. So it all of a sudden gives you that agility that you're looking for a variety of products.
Oh, I bet.
And small footprint.
It's interesting. First of all,
and that's applicable in, like you said, all of those different industries, whether you're in
that sometimes
consumer packaged goods,
sometimes
automotive industry, all of these customers I talk to,
or you can
I sort of joke with them about how
there's just this
complex
of
their SKUs are. And someone, very smart person once said to me, the thing that we know that we can predict about consumers is they will change their minds.
It's exciting.
And so when I talk to
people in the
manufacturing space about that, they laugh. And they're like, you have no idea, actually.
That's another big moment in time.
So many SKUs.
I can imagine. Then I can only imagine like what the Amazon warehouse is like, trying to pick and pack in something like that. But that's absolutely fascinating, thinking about it in terms of the perception layer of being able to actually see and process that.
We also have
the application layer, the hardware layer, and then once you get the AI on that ability just to rapidly adapt and deploy.
Really interesting.
You gave me a challenge. We talked about smart field as our new term. Not saying we need to take these, but I got two possible acronyms for you, right? So we could have SRAs, which would be Smart Field Robotics Agility. That's what we could deliver. Or we could
adapting
have
quickly to say you still
ARSs,
need to
which would
align
be
with the
Agile
organization.
Robotic Smart Field. So there you go.
Oh, okay. I
So-
like it. I like it.
So we can come up with some different acronyms that
And
bring
then,
this together. But
I think we'll probably touch
but
on
kind
this
of playing
later,
that
but just the
concept
amount
out a
of
little bit more
internal
than,
communications at
a
that
lot of
point,
what you're talking about is then
it just
creating
went
a
through
paradigm
the roof
shift.
and gave me
And
deep
a paradigm
appreciation for
shift,
the value of it that
I would think
see
across
so
the
clearly
organization.
now
So when you're trying to tell
my
this
current
story
work. It's a
about
different
how to
application
set
of
up
it, but
agile
it's just
robotic
so,
smart
it's
fields,
so
shall we
important. So
say,
gave me a really deep appreciation for that as well.
between the engineering department and the procurement department and other groups, does that make storytelling that much more important to really unify the challenge that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the big
changes
challenges.
generationally. But
And
also,
I kind of go
think it was
back
a false
to
binary to begin
how I
with,
tend
in
to
many
approach
ways.
all the
Although it was
problems and
easier
think
to
about like
command
who
and
does it
control
really
things
well,
in and out
right?
back
Or
in the
where
day.
is this
Not
working?
totally.
And I
But
think
I think the other thing
in
is there was a
how
real
can it relate
hierarchy
to that
from my
sort of
observation
customer, and you
about
think,
external
okay, well,
comms
if I'm
being the
a
thing,
manufacturer
and
in an
internal
automotive
comms being, yeah, we have to do some
facility,
internal
maybe I'm
comms.
the
I think
you know,
that
head
has
of operations for
radically
this
shifted. I used to talk
facility,
about,
and I've been
to me,
through the
the
painful
drop falls in the
process of
pond, and the
procuring
first ring that
robots and
radiates out
convincing
is
my
your own
purchasing
people and your own
team and
internal
this,
stakeholders.
that, and the other.
How
And
is your
then you say to
understanding of
them,
what
like,
has
look,
been known
why
as internal
couldn't it be as
communications
easy as
changed?
going
Do you agree
to
with some of what I'm thinking?
your
that
local
that there
hardware
was never, it
store
shouldn't have
and
been a binary to
buying
begin with
a
in some ways?
tool or a leaf blower or like something so simple? Why does it have to be that complicated? Or we even think about, how the car industry or the automobile industry has been disrupted a little bit in terms of like the somewhat not so great dealership experience. I guess it depends on the dealership, but then Carvana came along and CarMax and all of these companies that are really trying to make that process less painful. I would love to see robotics as an industry get to that. Like, I would love to see us be able to go to a website, say, that's the thing that I need to solve that problem. I know that it starts at this price, get started. Like, make it as easy as shopping on Amazon is. I mean, it'll be a long while before we get there, but I think working toward that, it shouldn't take weeks. It shouldn't take months. It shouldn't be so buried in, I don't know, just all of the conversations that have to happen and the skirting around, like, what is the price? I have to use a car analogy there too. And I tell my teams, like, I just think our customers want to know. I know that you can't quote them a specific price because there are a lot of details that go into actually building a solution for a customer. But I need to know, is it am I buying a Ferrari or am I buying a nice Honda or am I buying a scooter? That's all I need to know. What budget do I need to allocate for this thing? And we should be able to tell them. Like, it shouldn't be this mysterious black box of, oh, you have to wait for a quote and talk to 5 people, and it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to feel like they're being held captive, right? That's not a good customer experience. And again, I think part of that storytelling and the understanding about things like the flexibility, the adaptability, talking about perception and the ability to
not just our
see
sales
and
folks,
know
but
what
yes,
to
our
pick
sales
and
folks
where.
are going out and meeting with our customers.
To me, those
every day,
become
so
really
definitely have
powerful when you're working
Any
through the
employee,
C-suite,
talking
because
to
you
their
don't
friends,
just
their
have to
families.
have
We are
a
generally, yes, we have
PhD in
some,
engineering to
sites in
understand
bigger
what
cities, but
needs
generally
to
speaking,
be
we're
done.
located in smaller
And
towns,
the other
smaller
thing that's
communities
interesting is I
around
hear
the
you
world.
talk about
We're
that,
tightly
and this
knit
is where I
within
can
those
really
communities. And
hear
so
the
our
former
employees need to
chief growth
be
officer and the chief
armed with the
marketer
ability to go
in
and speak
you
about what we're
really
doing,
coming
or be informed
through.
about what
And
we're doing.
I guess I
Right?
would
So
ask
they
the
become
question,
our biggest
as
ambassadors.
you're,
And so that's really important. And
evolving
then you just get
into
into
your
like
role as
the nuts and
CEO,
bolts of building
how have
company
those
pride,
previous roles
super
maybe
important.
changed the way you look at it a little
And
bit
making sure that,
differently
you know,
than the
people
typical
really
Silicon
understand
Valley
that
CEO who
things
may have come
behind
up from
when we talk
programming
about
or heavy
decarbonizing
hardware
growth
or
transform the
different
waste when we're talking
aspects
about
than
plastics,
where you
what does that
came
really
from.
mean?
Yeah, I think that, it's still, I guess, like any role, right? It's going to take a little more time to fully grow into this role. So I'm embracing that, trying anyway, to embrace a little bit of that uncertainty. But I think look, when things get really hard,
and
there have
frankly,
definitely been hard
it's
days.
a wonderful
there
laboratory
are
to test
running
how messages land. And I say that in a very
is an
authentic
emotional
way, what
roller
resonates,
coaster
because we all know as
and
people
so on the
who
days
are
where it's really hard,
really
I think
what we're trying to do in this business, and the reason
customer
I
that's
definitely accidentally
is the
fell
North
into this
Star on
field.
this. What
And,
does
I
the
was going to be a
customer
literature
need?
professor. I'm very interested.
I need to
in
make
written
decisions that
language,
align with the best thing.
like a frustrated academic at heart, so I love training and teaching.
For our company, but
I think
but
what's
the best
been
thing for the
fascinating about this
customer,
business
and we
is
develop
not just
technology
learning, so much learning. Like you
so
said,
it's almost like
I used to
giving
go to factories in the early days with early clients or manufacturing
is the way I tend to
facilities.
approach it,
no
rather
idea
than
that this
we
was
don't
all
do
happening.
things
So
because
learn.
we
But
do
the other
things
thing is to really
because
understand
we
we're here to
should,
cultivate understanding
or we do
between
things
people.
because
We're
there's
here
a real
to
need
try
for
to
them. And I
improve
think
literal
that
communications between people.
in my experience,
and that could be a
has
marketing
given,
message too. I
gives
want to give something
engineering
of service to
teams,
you, and I want to
a
serve it at the right
really
time because you need this
good
thing or
goal
this
to
service, or
work
you
toward,
want to
because
learn more.
sometimes it's,
But it's
it's
amazing
like in
internally
design,
if
right?
you
You can
can't
design
kind of-
anything, but when really
people
good
talk about
design
hearts and
happens,
minds.
there
If
are
you
good
can't
constraints.
bring
And so if you
that
could apply good
excitement or that
constraints
understanding
to the
your own
company
team, especially
overall,
when
and
it's
in
as
my
global
role
and
in
large as
growth
Dow,
was really around
what an incredible
optimizing,
incubator for
our
understanding
funnel and driving
how messages are
top,
received and how they resonate.
driving
If you don't start there,
growth.
where are you going to start?
And now my role is more expanded in terms of like
you
the
were
product,
public policy, office of the
so
CEO.
much
Now
more. But still
you're global
thinking
director
about
of
it in
business
that
and
way.
marketing communications.
We're solving
so
a
years
customer
ago,
problem.
what did you think
we
business
believe
and
as a
marketing
company that
communications
simplicity
meant?
is better
Like
than
what was your
complexity
perception
always.
of what that would be?
How do you make it?
And did you self-identify with that at all before
for everybody?
evolving,
And then how do you talk about it in a way that people
can
can really relate to it and talk about it at the different layers? As a marketer, one of the things I always think about, and we were, this was a big Hasbro learning, is thinking about marketing as a cake, right? You should always have the layers of a cake. And in those layers, a few marketing tactics is not a marketing plan. And so I think about communications that way. I think about how we drive the vision for the company in that way. What is that vision? How do we articulate it to our engineers, to our salespeople, to our customers, to our investors, to our analysts, all of the people that we interact with, to our communications partners. And I think that is probably the skill that I bring to the CEO role, is really that the passion for the customer and the ability to communicate or kind of translate sometimes very complicated, complex concepts into a very relatable thing, or a very easy to understand analogy, maybe, that makes it sort of a no-brainer for anyone across the organization to understand. It's a focus on results, not on technology. It's really about the results.
Really about the results,
the
and
executive communications support,
what I'm hearing from you, really about those pain points that you're looking to solve.
Global marketing leaders,
kind of as you've gone
through,
helping companies at the point of transformation.
When they're going out and talking,
what is something that you think far too many CEOs or other leaders miss about
various
the importance of brand building and marketing? Especially when you're bringing out emerging technologies or building emerging markets like AI, robotics.
Again,
what is something that gets missed, or where do people get caught up
within the business?
And then how can we as communicators or marketers help them?
Well, one of the things I tell people is that everything communicates. I was working with one of our VCs. I think it was B Partners the other day, had a post on LinkedIn where they talked about the opportunity of the data room, which is where all of your data goes as you're raising money or going through mergers and acquisitions and things like that, and ways to organize, even in the organization and the structure of that, how
it's exciting to peel back the layers of the
it's an
onion.
opportunity to represent
again, you
how
were
you're thinking
directly
about the
involved
business,
with a lot
how
of that,
things
but
are
then to peel
organized,
deeper
what's
and see,
important.
and the interplay
And it just reminded me that
what might be
that
understood
it
as
is one of
business or
those
corporate
fundamental
communications and the marketing communication
things,
side
right?
that make
Everything
you more customer or
communicates.
prospect driven.
And so
you're seeing that symbiotic
reminding
relationship between
our
the
teams
two,
about
and how the
that
issues landscape and articulating really purpose and values, and also
experience,
very
whether it's
tangible. You've talked about two of them: the
the
declimatizing
UI,
and also reducing waste, the plastics piece that you folks are working
how
really hard
we
on.
deploy those robots,
how that
how we
creates
communicate to the customer when they're coming, and anticipate all the questions they're going to have, and be proactive
as you reflect
about
on
that business. So I think that's where that's one of the ways that
how have you
marketers can
seen
really
business
help.
comms or marketing comms changing
I also
over
think
time?
that
What's your reflections on the landscape that you and your team are
given
working
marketing
on now?
sometimes it's been my experience, marketing can have a very bad reputation. Depends on the company, but sometimes, I've heard everything from like, oh, marketing is where good ideas go to die, to like, oh my gosh, don't, the marketing team is going to whatever, they'll gloss over all of this and it won't matter, or oh, I don't know. Anyway, lots of cliches, I think, about marketing teams. But I think marketers are very good at understanding people. And I think that if you bring in your marketing team at an early stage and build a strong partnership with them, it can be really powerful. And I think in technology that takes time. There are a lot of marketers that come from entertainment, classic sort of consumer packaged goods marketing. Transitioning into technology is not always that easy. But I think what you learn in running those types of businesses is very translatable to the technology industry. And I would say the technology industry needs that sort of classic marketing expertise and understanding of, early signals of what's happening with a product, or early indicators that something is wrong. How do we adapt quickly? And in technology, we have the great ability to do that. In consumer goods, when things take 9 to 18 months to manufacture, you can't be so agile. And so I think that's where marketing can really help, in the technology space, if they're brought in at the right stage.
It brought in at the right stage.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Really,
but I think,
important.
when you're talking about the customer
My team's
experience, very
role
good at understanding people,
is,
I would add in speaking their
lead
language,
generation,
right? Which
be part of the
becomes
sales
really,
conversion
really
process
important.
and all
So
of
maybe
that.
you can,
But
if we
that's
go back to
definitely
the
not
Autodesk
where it
experience,
stops.
maybe you can
You have
talk
to
a little
use
bit
the
about
title of the
what did you
podcast
learn
here,
about
right?
speaking
It's
their
around
language
building
there. I
brand
mean,
gravity,
you're coming
building
out of,
brand equity, brand loyalty.
entertainment, toys, all this really cool stuff, and then you're thrust in the world of advanced manufacturing. So what did you learn about talking their language?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What did I learn about talking their language? Well, one thing I do also tell people is I learned a lot about manufacturing in the toy industry. It is definitely not like, Santa's workshop. There is a lot of work that goes into planning toys, manufacturing toys. I had the luxury of working on a lot of different toy businesses. Transformers was one in particular, one of my favorites, but writing, signing, we had to sign tooling appropriations to build these toys. And for those of you who may not, fully understand that process, there are like these tools are big pieces of metal that have all kinds of different cavities in them. They cost a lot to make. If you have a big holiday toy, you have to create multiple molds to be able to fit that, the supply and demand. And it's really cool. You learn a lot about it, and to see it live is also really cool. So I knew some of it. I didn't know all of the deeper technical details, but I think just spending time with it, I learned it. And I had a team, I think, showing my team that or my coworkers, that I really was interested in not only being able to talk to the customer, but in deeply understanding what it was that they were doing. And we got to this place where, I was working, I think at the time, I did some product marketing and technical marketing for NetFabs and additive manufacturing software from Autodesk. And I knew, I'd say I was maybe a little bit more than beginner level understanding of additive manufacturing, but over time developed a much deeper expertise and would sit down with my team and walk through like pages and pages of documentation in what they were developing and ask questions. And then I would come back to them, and we got to this place where at the end, after working with them for a few months, I could come back and say, I just read this 10-page paper that you wrote. Here are the 3 key points I think that are most critical. And they were like, yeah, that's it. And so rather than dismissing my sort of, simplification of all of this big thinking, they actually appreciated it because I was able to encapsulate the depth of complexity and what really matters in that from a technical capacity, but also how does it translate to results for the customer? And so being able to merge those two things was really important.
Yeah, I think that becomes really powerful. And like you said, you got to make sure you take the time at the front end to stop, to ask the questions, to learn, to be inquisitive,
very, very targeted,
and then really
right?
understand all these things that you've been saying. What are you trying to solve? What is the ultimate end result?
Everybody has access to a lot of
how do you put that together in a story that makes sense? I mean, you've affectionately referred to yourself as, and I hope I'm not going out too much of a limb, but you've affectionately referred to yourself as a nerd whisperer with a source of pride, and I think it should be, because to me that really illustrates the importance and the power of storytelling.
We broadcast it.
You can only do good storytelling if you have
anybody can tune in and
truly understand the subject that you're trying to put together and why it matters to the audience. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about your badge of nerd whisperer.
Yeah, I hope it's not offensive to people. I use it in the most endearing way. I'm surrounded by lots of very smart people in my life. I do joke with my teams that I am sort of like wish that I was an engineer.
I think that's powerful. It gets back to that.
I think I really have the patience
word I used
to be
earlier,
an engineer, but I have a great admiration,
there's
for engineers and for the
and
people who are
it's an interesting time, again, a dynamic tension, right? Because with AI and other types of technologies, at least how generative AI
really hard,
or the attempt to get there is
to
being
understand
applied now in marketing and communications,
and
etc.
to be able to
the targeting
to be
will
sort
become
of their
more
voice
predictive,
to the world,
more precise.
It's been my experience.
That's the dream,
that
at
a lot of
least.
these people
And many are
don't
advancing that. There's a real arms race now in that field. So technology, comtech, marketing tech, all of these things.
So it builds this really great,
the written word, all of this stuff, creative is expanding.
I get a lot of
so the targeting
appreciation
will increase,
and satisfaction for learning from them,
audiences.
So and the work that they're doing, and being able to represent that to the world in a way that really gives it
management and marketing
life.
Communications.
I sort of hate to see
experiential events.
Smart people with big ideas that never really make it to see the light of day because they don't really know how to talk about it, or they don't really know how to apply it in a way that it can reach its full potential.
Yeah, and I always find, with what we do, we talk to a lot of engineers and chemists and developers, and like I said, extremely smart people that, my God, what they're doing, I can't even fathom what they do.
I think it's
the patience to apply the scientific method.
I'm blessed to have.
I always find it so fascinating once you get into that discussion with them, the amazing stories that you can find and translate to the market in terms of what's inspiring them to do different things,
really
or
blessed to be able to
what's
have
that spark of innovation, because there's always that spark, and then how do you put that into context of how you make the product better, or how do you make the programming better, or how do you allow the robot to see better, is just absolutely fascinating. So I brought that up, not in jest, but really, I think as a means of admiration for these incredibly gifted people that are so deep in the technology and the innovation,
the customer,
but then
the primary stakeholders,
letting them know they're actually the heroes here, and we need to bring that to life.
Yeah, and I think it's in the beginning, it's still something that is very important to me, is being able to earn the trust, honestly, and respect of those people, because it's not easy what they're doing. And I think that I try really hard to be able to represent it in a way that makes them proud, to stand behind the work that they're doing, not just a trivial banner headline or something like that. I mean, I love a good billboard, but but it's got to be more than just that.
100%. So let's kind of take this
they're
back
not necessarily
to where we started,
seeing us
because it just kind of naturally
that's
leading
kind of how
us
we're
to
organized.
this whole notion of design thinking, right? And thinking outside of the box.
So I think that our team,
discovery and ideation and imagination, which are all really, really
all the different
powerful
stakeholders
things.
that have some
maybe there's some lessons you learned from your
doing,
early
and then
days
how
at
that
Hasbro
pulls back
and with
into
the Transformers and all that stuff that you worked on.
Managing your reputation as a company.
But how should we think about
the
design thinking in everything that we do to really
still not super
be
easy,
the best that we can to innovate in new ways? Are there lessons from what you did in toys and entertainment that apply to robotics or solving these really huge operational challenges at these companies we've been talking about?
I think on the people front, I had some great managers that I learned a lot from when I was there. And one of the things
quantitative metrics, I think we have to insist on them.
I remember very clearly as a new manager, I often tell people that I'm working with and people I'm mentoring, the story
one of the things that's really I
was leading a new team.
I feel another binary.
I came in one morning and said to my manager, here are the things that I've done. And she closed the door and she sat me down and she was like, you're leading a team.
Going all the way down
I never want to hear again about what you've done. I want to hear it. This is about the team. You're representing the team.
Very,
and I was
very
like,
interesting.
oh my God, she's right.
Using sport for purpose.
I totally
and I think
screwed up.
And I think that's great.
I mean, there's
one thing I want to
probably
make sure
time for both of those things, but
we've been touching on this idea of a matrix.
It is a really good lesson in that whatever you're doing, you're representing.
It is global.
People and your job as a manager.
And one of the things I've been thinking about as you were talking before, and I think
motivate those people, support those people, break down barriers for those people, for them to be able to achieve their greatest potential.
And I feel like we need to.
That was sort of on the people side of things. One of the important lessons that I learned.
Right, and it's not just
I think in terms of thinking really big,
what are some
tips
is something else that
I
professionals
learned
in this space for understanding
sort of
the skill sets needed to
a thing across all
understand
entertainment kind of businesses. But
and second of all, actually,
I believe there was an exercise that we were part of with our communications team very early on, early days of the Transformers business. Transformers has been a toy brand for a very long time. We had the TV show, and we started to think, how do we make this bigger? This was before the movies, and we got into a brainstorming exercise that started with, think for a minute about our wildest success. What would the news headline be? So I don't know if the news headline, like whether it's I don't know if that is as relevant today, but maybe on social media, I don't know what the headline or, and then let's work backwards, from that. So we were sort of went down this interesting path of Optimus Prime does this, thing. We sort of turned it into a news headline and said, well, of course it's going to happen on July 4th. And the robot's going to be a 747. And then we've got this 747 launch date. And it just sort of the energy of that yes and design process, design
or connecting the dots.
And
sometimes
really
we know
big,
this is happening here.
Beyond
this is
the constraints
here, right?
of your business today is something that I really learned there that I have brought with me through my career. And I try to sort of instill that sense of imagination in all of my teams and think imagine if, our budget wasn't a problem, our regional constraints weren't a problem, we had unlimited resources, what would we do and how would we do it? And I think that gets people really thinking okay, I don't have to think about what is my problem I'm solving for next month or this sprint. It can be really outside of the box, that the concept of playing bigger and play to win. So I think those are some other things that I learned there. And then I would say finally is how to harness that big idea and translate it into an actionable plan. I am, as maybe you can tell from this conversation, my mind is 1,000 places all at once. I sometimes have a hard time staying focused on how are we going to get something done? So I build frameworks for myself to be able to do it. And I, with my team in the past few months, I've been talking about what I call the 2-2-2 plan. What are we doing in the next 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 quarters to get to where we need to go? And where we need to go, obviously there's a vision beyond 2 quarters, but in the world of startups, things change so fast that I think that 2 quarters is as far as we're really, really planning at the moment in great detail.
So thinking 2 quarters ahead, okay, I'm gonna ask you to think like 3 years ahead. How's that for getting in the crazy future?
I like it.
So what do you see as the future of AI, robotics, all of that? Where are we going, and how is the work that you and your colleagues are doing today? How's that going to change the world to the better? Getting back to some of the early framing you were talking about.
Well, first, I'd like to see a world in 3 years where we get rid of what I call the robot graveyard, which is the place where all of the failed deployments go to die. We often go into these manufacturing facilities and we say to customers, tell us about your experience with robotics. And they're like, oh, I have a robot. We had robots, stopped working. Now we don't have anything. And I'm like, well, tell me more. How did that happen? Where are they? And they're like, oh, let me show you. And they walk me to some back closet. It's like covered in, move to the back closet, signs. So I want to see that go away because I think it's created a sense of understandably distrust of robotics, distrust of the industry. And I don't think nobody's doing anything malicious. I just think that it's the state of robotics as they used to be. I don't think it's the state where it needs to be. So I think that robots are getting smarter. I want to see people embracing technology to be able to make them work. And again, it comes back to results. We, as a robotics industry, have to help our customers succeed. And to do that, we have to make it as intuitive and as streamlined as possible. Like, these customers are dealing with this immense complexity. They are dealing with changing priorities, shrinking budgets, fewer people, higher goals. They don't have time to be robotics experts. You want your customers to be manufacturing experts or logistics experts. We can be the robotics experts, but we have to do it in a way that is easy. A way that makes it easy to buy for us, easy to deploy, easy to scale. Think about all of the other industries that do this really well, that have this customer first mentality, and try to adopt those kinds of practices.
Yeah. And it's funny, going back to the silos, space. I was laughing to myself.
Again, so much of what I'm getting out of this conversation is just kind of reframing and being willing to change our own paradigms, to think big and to think differently, but then really embrace the possibilities. But then behind that, you've got to have the confidence that the technology is going to work, that you've got the flexibility to adapt and redeploy it, that you can constantly reinvent, which I think has been really powerful. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I recently read,
if I can just summarize a little bit of our conversation with Kim Losey, who's CEO of Rapid Robotics.
Everybody should
read this. By talking about
also,
her amazing path.
About
very atypical one, I would say, for a CEO of a Silicon Valley company, starting off as a designer, working through marketing teams, ultimately becoming a chief growth officer before becoming CEO, but really thinking about how the design thinking that you learned at an early age has just really opened up how you've looked at solving problems and thinking about the customer experience and what it is that you want to solve. We went a little bit in depth.
It'll get you thinking.
The AI, automatic, and robotics industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talking about kind of, can we apply Maslow's hierarchy of
podcast
need
is one, and actually I think that was recommended to me by GNS's own Kyle Turner,
where we can get the robots to see and know what it needs to pick up.
Absolutely. And
application layers, physical hardware layers, overlay that with AI.
if you're interested in
introduced a new
AI,
term, smart field,
or all
coming
things
soon
really tech,
to a
but
publication
they
near
spend so much
you.
time on AI.
Also created an
They
acronym,
cover the gamut of all the
ARS,
stories, but
Agile
in a really funny
Robotics
way.
Smart
and I think
Fields. But
it's
I
really,
think
really
for
well
me,
done.
as we
And then the
really
last
got to
thing,
talking
and
about
it's
things, the
something
powerful
that I've been
points
connecting
were
with my kids on
giving
lately.
technology
So the
purpose.
Sphere in Las
Remember,
Vegas, I'm sort of
everything
obsessed with
communicates,
now.
every
And in
interaction,
part, I
every
thought it was
customer
cool before, but
experience point.
they recently
And
had
then,
Fish play
for
there for like
me,
5 nights. I'm a
Kim,
big
it was
Fish
really
fan.
you summing it
And
up
now Dead
with
and
kind of
Company, the Grateful
these
Dead,
4
is
steps to
doing a bunch of shows
success,
there.
regardless
And
of
the
what
videos that like they're
industry.
just filling
You've
my
applied it across
timelines
multiple
with the
industries. You're
amazing
applying
light
it
shows and
now with
visuals and
Rapid.
everything. So
Number one, don't be afraid to think big. Number two, embrace the power of imagination. Number three, play to win. And number four, harness that big idea with an actionable plan. Did I miss anything? Anything you want to add before we wrap our conversation?
I guess the last thing I would add, the last tip that I will often share with people, it's my own, I don't know that this works for everybody.
Peter, thank
but
you
when
so
I
much for
think
talking
about when you start
to me
thinking
today.
big,
It's been
things
such a pleasure
can
to have
sometimes
you on
get
Building
scary.
Brand Gravity. And
you put yourself
you
out there and your ideas out there. Certainly as the CEO of Rapid Robotics, I am, it's a bit of a vulnerable place to be, right? This company is depending on me to help it succeed. But I always think, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like in all of these big moves I've made in my life, I always ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? Is it really likely to happen? And is it really that bad? Can I design my way out of it? Probably. And so that's kind of my, last layer of decision-making criteria before I do something crazy.
No, that's really good advice. Well, Kim, thank you very much for joining us on Building Brand Gravity and sharing your experiences and being vulnerable about the challenges that you yourself are facing as you're evolving into the new role and really trying to, in a lot of ways, upend the way an industry has typically done things. And you can learn more about the exciting things that Kim and her team are doing at Rapid Robotics by visiting their website, which is rapidrobotics.com. You can visit her on LinkedIn. It's at Kimberly Losey. So, again, thank you very much, Kim, for joining our conversation. Thank you for our listeners. If you liked what you heard today, we encourage you to learn more about Rapid. We encourage you to subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and tune in for future episodes. Thank you for joining Building Brand Gravity. I'm one of your hosts, Steve Halsey. Have a wonderful day.